As we round out the program this morning, we have the opportunity to hear from Senator Joe Simitian, the man who authored SB 1381 and to whom we all owe a debt of gratitude. To give him a proper introduction, I'd like to welcome Dr. Mira Mani, the brilliant and visionary director of the Children, Families, and Communities Division of the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. The Packard Foundation has been a tremendous supporter of early education and transition kindergarten. Thank you.
I never know what to say when someone calls me brilliant. I don't think of myself that way. But, you know, I am so delighted to be here today amongst champions, people that have made this happen, and people that are going to make this happen for children in California. And the truly sustainable society is one in which we invest in women and children. And that's the wisdom the founders of the Packard Foundation had, David and Lucille Packard, when they decided to put their money into philanthropy, to invest in women, to invest in children, and to invest in the planet and the environment. So for over 4 decades now, we have been interested in the issues of children and really thinking big and thinking bold and moving the agenda for children forward. And what we have focused on more specifically are quality programs, especially high-quality preschool, as you know, advocacy, policy development, supporting teachers, and of course, building champions. And I'm here today to introduce a very, very special champion, without whom we would not have this summit, and we wouldn't be at this stage of the children's movement in California. Joe Simitian was elected to the California State Senate in November 2004 to represent the 11th District, which includes San Mateo, Santa Clara, of which I am a resident, and Santa Cruz counties. His public service over the years includes a stint as an assembly member, a president of the Palo Alto School Board, the mayor of Palo Alto, and also a member of the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors. Capital Weekly has described him as one of the half-dozen most effective members of the legislature. The San Jose Magazine has repeatedly recognized him as one of the Power 100 of Silicon Valley, and the Scientific American as one of 50 leaders in technology from around the world. So clearly touches multiple aspects of our lives, and that's the kind of leadership we need. And we love you, Joe, if I may be so familiar, because you authored SB 1381 and established transitional kindergarten into law. And thank you so much for being the champion for children, and we look forward to more good things to come, because learning begins at birth, and we really have to give every kid every chance to succeed. With that, Senator Joe Simitian.
Well, that was exceptionally kind. I have to tell you, years ago when I was fortunate enough to have a equally gracious introduction, I had a young staff member who turned to me and said, "What do you think when people say things like that about you?" And the honest answer is, I always think, "Gee, I wish my wife were here." That's what you think. But so thank you. It's always hard to know where to begin this story because if time permitted, and it does not, we could go back 25 years to have this conversation. But I'm going to begin in the spring of 2009 when a couple of classroom teachers from my district came to my office, a kindergarten teacher named Diana Argenti and a reading specialist named Natalie Beavis, and they said, "Senator, we want you to change the age for kindergarten." And I, of course, smiled because I said, well, this has been a 25-year effort that has gone nowhere in a hurry. You don't have to persuade me, but I hope I can persuade you that this may not be a particularly good use of your time and talent and energies, given the fact that Democrats and Republicans, legislators and governors over the years have all tried to do what seemed like a fairly simple common sense thing, change that December 2nd date to September 1st, and say if you aren't 5 by September 1st, then you're probably not ready to start California kindergarten. And they listened very patiently, as kindergarten and reading specialist teachers are wont to do. And then, just as you would expect, they said, well, thank you, we appreciate hearing that, but we really want you to introduce the bill. And I said, well, let me explain again. And with the patience that you would expect, they listened again as I explained all the reasons why there wasn't a snowball's chance this was ever going to happen. And they said, that's really good for us to know, and we'd like you to introduce the bill. And so we introduced the bill, Senate Bill 1381, the following year at the beginning of 2010. And I want to be very upfront with you. I had no expectation whatsoever that the bill would pass and become law by the end of the year. But I thought that it was an important conversation, and a conversation that we could perhaps get started again, and for that reason, introduce the bill. And I knew from my years of experience in the Capitol and as a former school board member that this made sense, but I thought what the teachers brought to the conversation, based on their years of professional experience in the classroom, was particularly compelling, and it was the conversation that we ought to be having on a broader statewide basis. They made the case, and I should tell you, they showed up with a petition signed by 287 of their classroom colleagues. They made the case in a way that I thought really was undeniable. And the conversation started when I said, well, I see that you have a petition signed by 287 of your colleagues, even though they're not kindergarten teachers. I assume they're just expressing their solidarity. And they very politely said, well, no, Senator, you don't get it. The reason the first grade teachers and the third grade teachers and the fifth grade teachers have signed that petition is because, and I see the heads nodding, the problems that develop when these kids start too young in kindergarten follow them on to first grade and third grade and fifth grade. So this is not just a kindergarten issue, and we hope you understand that. And I said, all right, consider me schooled, I understand it. And then when I said, well, what does that mean in terms of the problems that you experience later on if you're one of those too young fives? They pointed out that they had too many kids who were being retained in first through third grade, and that those kids were disproportionately the kids who had started too young. And then they talked about the special education placements that might not have been necessary if only those youngsters had started at an age-appropriate time in their lives. And they pointed to the fact that there were, in fact, good data to support the notion that fewer youngsters would be placed in special education if we were starting these kids at an age-appropriate point in their lives. And so they not only had made a believer out of me, but they made me a more informed believer. And so we said, all right, we're going to take the case to the Capitol. And folks from the California Kindergarten Association rallied, and folks from Preschool California rallied, and a host of others who are sponsoring today's event, to whom I give thanks, because the thing you learn in the legislature is that one vote doesn't pass a good idea. You need 41 in the Assembly. You need 21 in the Senate. And you need help from folks along the way. And by the way, among the folks who gave help along the way are my President Pro Tem, Darrell Steinberg, who is a joint author on the bill and who understood the importance of this age, and the Speaker of the State Assembly, who, when the bill was at risk of being stuck in the Appropriations Committee, because there are some pretty big numbers involved here, helped create the political will to move the bill forward. So thank you to all of them and to all of you. But still, not terribly optimistic, candidly, because in the 25-year history of this conversation in the state capitol, no bill had ever reached the floor of the Assembly or the Senate for a vote, let alone a successful vote to move the bill along, let alone through both houses of the legislature. And for reasons that are still a bit magical to me, we made the case, the argument got heard, the bill moved through the system, and all of a sudden we were on the floor of the state Senate for the first time in a 25-year debate, and the bill was out of the state Senate and on its way over to the state Assembly, and all of a sudden a bunch of folks who had been largely disinterested said, this might be worth paying attention to. And while people understood the importance of making sure that kids were age appropriate, for all the reasons that I just described and that I had been so well schooled on, we discovered that we had a problem. Now I have to tell you, this isn't only in Sacramento problem. The problem was that the bill, by rolling back the start date, saves $700 million a year, every year for 13 years. Because if you've got a group of kids who are 400,000 kindergartners, And we say, no, when we start, that's going to be adjusted, and we're only going to take those kids who are 5 by September the 1st, you're down to 300,000 kids in that cohort. And that means 100,000 kids who would otherwise cost $700 million aren't going to be showing up. And of course, that's a smaller cohort every year they go through the system. So you save that $700 million in the first grade, in the second grade, in the third grade, in the fourth grade. So not only do you have a $700 million problem, times 13, quick, do the math, you have a problem in excess of $9 billion. Now, you're all giving me the same look that any normal group of people, and take this as a compliment, would give me if I said, what's the problem with $700 million a year for 13 years? And the problem is, everybody thinks it should be theirs. If there's $700 million, everybody thinks that's our money. Now, what did we do with those savings? Initially in the bill, we said, well, we'll put $350 million of it towards the deficit. We'll put $350 million of it towards additional funding for preschool, and let's call it a day. And then the conversation got really interesting because deficit hawks said, no, we want all $700 million for the deficit. Okay. Then there were folks in the school community who said, well, given the beating that schools have taken over the last 3 years, don't you think all $700 million ought to belong to Prop 98 funded programs? And then some people said, well, I think it should go to Prop 98, but, you know, we're cutting programs left and right. Shouldn't we take the $700 million and just use it to hold the line as best we can on the programs that are at risk today? And ultimately, the compelling argument that won was this one. It's great that we make kindergarten age appropriate. It's great that we understand that today's kindergarten isn't the kindergarten that most of us recall so fondly. But there is a question, which is, how can we best serve those kids who are not going to show up for kindergarten? Are we going to go to their parents and tell them, you need to stay home for another year? You need to pay for childcare for another year? Are we going to tell them that it's in the best interest of their young 5 to sit at home and watch TV rather than show up for school? Or are we going to say, you know what, if we're saving $700 million a year because those kids don't show up for kindergarten, shouldn't we see this as the chance of a lifetime to use those same dollars, savings that are derived from their delayed entry, shouldn't we see this as an opportunity to use those dollars to give those kids a transitional kindergarten which assures that when they show up at an age-appropriate time of their lives, they have the benefit of a year of quality transitional kindergarten taught by certificated staff in a public school setting. And that is the conclusion we came to, and that's the genesis of the transitional kindergarten program that you all are about to launch, which I believe will have extraordinary benefits for kids in this state. Now, I think that was the right decision, but I think there were some other important decisions that were made, and I think we got most of them right. One of them was the 2-year delayed implementation. There are very few ideas, no matter how good they are, that really ought to be implemented with the snap of a finger if we're talking about 6 million kids in 1,000 school districts around California. So the notion here was, let's take time to plan. Sometimes you have to go slow before you go fast. And that's why there was a 2-year delayed implementation, so that you didn't have the kind of overnight expectation that other rollouts have had in the history of the state. That's why we said, let's have a 3-year phase-in. Let's roll it out over 3 years so that we learn by our experience, step by step. What works? What doesn't? What could work better? What are the success stories that we want to replicate as we go forward? That's why we said, let's retain the notion of an early admittance waiver for those families where there is a youngster who really can and should start, notwithstanding his or her age. Let's retain local control. And for me, this one was fun. As a former school board member, I have to tease you just a little bit, because after the bill passed, I heard from folks all around the state, we need more guidance, we need more direction, we need to be told. I said, are these really my K-12 friends around the state of California who want Sacramento to tell them how to do it? And ultimately, of course, when the superintendent put up those frequently asked questions, which were immensely helpful, when the Packard Foundation, in partnership with Preschool California, said, we're going to lay out some of the success stories and provide some of the curriculum examples, people began to realize that having the ability to do it the way that worked in their part of the state for their particular group of kids was perhaps one of the strengths, the greatest strengths of the bill, at least in my view. And finally, I would say, perhaps the most important thing we did was we listened to teachers. We listened to teachers. For any of you who've ever wondered, do those people in Sacramento, which is never a good start to a conversation in my experience, for any of you who have ever wondered, do those people in Sacramento get it? We got it because we listened to teachers, starting with Diane and starting with Natalie. And I remember there was a particular moment when we were working the halls and people were extolling the virtues of the bill. And I said, well, you know, guys, maybe we need to tone it down a little. This is important and it's going to be a big deal, but it's not that big a deal. And again, very politely, one of the teachers turned and said, Senator, we're not sure you get it. There are 6 million school kids in California's K-12 system. 25% of them started at an age that was probably too young to realize their full potential for success. That means you've got 1.5 million kids making their way through the system who didn't have the benefit of an age-appropriate start and who certainly didn't have the benefit of a transitional kindergarten. That is going to be a game changer of immense proportions. Ordinarily, I don't make these kinds of predictions, but I'm going to make them today. 15 years from now and before, we will see better test scores as a result. We will see improved performance by other more appropriate measures. We will see a reduction in retention for this group of kids. We will see fewer students inappropriately placed in special education. And over the course of 15 years, by reusing the money, reinvesting the money that we save, we will, without cost, send 1 million kids to transitional kindergarten and make sure that every kid who has started school has started at an age-appropriate, success-possible time in their lives. That is going to be your legacy a decade from now. My hope is that, in spite of the fact that I am a term-limited legislator, you will invite me back for the conference 10 years from now, and we can all take a moment to celebrate then, as I hope you are celebrating today, and say, look what we have done for kids in California. Wasn't that amazing, and shouldn't we be proud? Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure to be with you.